Girl and the Chenoo, a Native American folk tale as told by Joseph Bruchac and Gail Ross. Long ago, there was a girl whose older brothers were hunters. When they went on their hunting trips far into the forest, she would sometimes go with them. Because she was always ready to hear their stories, they called her Little Listener and were happy to have her along. As she was the youngest, Little Listener was usually the one chosen to stay behind and take care of their camp. While her brothers were out on the game trails, she would repair their bark-covered lodge, gather plants for food, and dry wood for their fire. Then, near the end of the day, she would cook their meal in the big pot. Each night, when her three brothers returned from their hunting, they would all sit around the fire and speak of what had happened to them that day. They often had exciting stories to tell. Today, her oldest brother might say, "I found the tracks of a great moose and followed them across the hills. At last, I caught up with the moose by the fork in the crooked stream. But when I saw how big it was, I knew that if I killed it, it would be hard to carry its meat and hide back to our camp. And I already had caught enough game for the day. So I let it go." Today, her second brother might say, "I found the den of a big bear. Just as I looked inside for it, I heard a sound behind me. There was that bear. But when I saw it was a mother with cubs, I knew it would not be right to shoot it. I had to run for my life to escape." Today, her third brother, who was the most imaginative of the three, might say, "I was on the track of two deer. I had one arrow. So I waited until they were standing right next to each other. When I shot, my arrow went through the first deer and also killed the second one. Why have I brought home only one deer? After I put down my bow, a great mountain lion dropped from a tree branch. I picked up a stick and fought for a long time. See this scratch here on my hand? When it saw it could not defeat me, it grabbed the bigger deer and ran off." So the three brothers would brag about their day of hunting. And whenever they asked their sister what she had done, her answer was always the same. "My day was quiet," Little Listener would say. "I gathered food plants and firewood, and I cooked our meal." It went on that way for some time. Then, one night, when the brothers returned, all three of them seemed to be badly frightened. "I have seen strange tracks to the north," the first brother said, "like those of a man, but much larger." "I have also seen those tracks," said the second brother, "but I saw them to the west." "I have seen such tracks too," said the third brother. "I found those tracks to the south." "I have seen nothing strange," said the girl. "I have gathered berries and firewood, and I have made our meal." That night, as they sat around the fire, the three brothers were quiet. At last, the oldest brother spoke. "Brothers," he said, "I think we were mistaken. I think those were only the tracks of bears." The two older brothers quickly agreed with him. Their younger sister, however, remained silent. She too had actually seen such tracks. They had been very close to the eastern edge of the hill by their camp. And Little Listener knew those tracks were not those of a bear. There was only one creature that could make such tracks. It was the Chenoo. the great cannibal monster in the shape of a man. But she knew that even to speak the name of the Chenoo would invite it into their camp. So she said nothing as her brother spoke, laughing and joking about being frightened by mere bear tracks. The next morning, the three brothers set out to hunt as usual, leaving their sister behind to care for the camp. But little Listener did not do her daily chores. Instead, she cooked up a big pot of venison stew and placed it in the center of their lodge. She propped open the door of the lodge and spread bearskin robes to the left of the door to make a place of honor for a guest. Then she sat and listened and waited. Before long, she heard the sound of heavy feet walking around the camp. Although they came closer and closer up the hill toward the wigwam, little Listener did not move. Now the footsteps were so close that the lodge shook with each step. Still, little Listener did not move or speak. The footsteps stopped, and she could see the big shadow of someone standing just outside the door. That was when little Listener spoke. "Grandfather," she said, "I'm glad you have come to visit me. Come inside. I have cooked a special meal for you." As soon as she spoke, the huge head and shoulders of the Chenoo filled the door of the lodge. "Granddaughter," the monster said, his voice like the rumbling of great boulders rolling down a hill. "I accept your invitation." Then the Chenoo squeezed his way into the wigwam. Even though the lodge was large enough for little Listener and her three brothers, the Chenoo barely fit inside. His big shoulders pressed against the sides of the wigwam, and his head reached up to the smoke hole in the roof. "Grandfather," little Listener said, pushing the bowl of stew toward the Chenoo, "I know you are hungry. This food is for you to eat." The Chenoo reached out one hand and picked up the big clay stew pot as if it were a small drinking cup. He swallowed the stew with one gulp and then smiled, showing teeth as large as spear points. "Granddaughter," the Chenoo rumbled, "I am glad you greeted me and invited me inside. I was about to eat you. But as I have learned you are my relative, I will not hurt you or the others who live in this lodge. Tell me what I can do to help you." "Grandfather," little Listener said, "I am glad you have recognized me. There may indeed be some things that you can do to help. Now, though, all I want you to do is rest. I know you must be tired from walking so far to the north and the east, the south and the west. I have made a place for you with those bear robes. Go to sleep." Then the Chenoo smiled again. "Granddaughter, I am tired indeed. I will do as you say, and I will rest." Then the Chenoo lay down on the bear robes, covering the entire floor of the wigwam, and fell asleep. Little Listener went outside. She closed the door of the lodge and sat in front of it with a smile on her face. That evening, when her brothers returned, they were happy and full of stories. Today, I have hunted well. Look at these rabbits I have brought back, said the oldest brother. Today, I too have hunted well. See the fine goose I have here, said the second one. Today, said the third brother, I have brought home this fine deer that I killed with one arrow. Little Listener sat smiling in front of the closed door of the lodge, saying nothing. At last, when the three brothers had finished telling their stories, they asked her what she had done that day. My day was quiet, she said. I gathered berries and gathered firewood. I made a big stew and invited our grandfather into our lodge. Our grandfather is here? Said the three brothers. Indeed, said Little Listener. He is sleeping now. I will wake him, but you must promise me to greet him as your relative when he comes outside. Of course we will greet him, her brother said. Wake him up. Then Little Listener pulled open the door of the wigwam. Grandfather, she said, your other grandchildren are here. They wish to greet you. As soon as she spoke, the Chenoo poked his huge head and shoulders out of the lodge. The three brothers stared at him, so frightened they could not speak. Greet your grandfather, Little Listener said. The three older brothers spoke in shaking voices. Grandfather, they said, we welcome you. We are glad to see you. It has been so long since we have seen you that you appear new to us. The Chenoo came out of the lodge and stood to look down at them. Grandsons, he said, I am glad you have greeted me as a relative. He looked at the game they had brought back. I see you have gotten food for my dinner. Then the Chenoo reached out and swallowed the rabbits and the goose with one gulp and the deer with another. The three brothers simply sat and stared. Grandfather, Little Listener said, now that you have eaten, we have nothing for our own meal. Can you bring us some food? Whatever you ask, I will do, said the Chenoo. He took 4 big strides. The first carried him out of the camp. The second carried him down the hill. The third carried him across the valley. And the fourth carried him out of sight. Brothers, Little Listener said, try to remember to be more friendly to our grandfather when he returns. No sooner had she finished speaking than the Chenoo came striding back into camp, carrying 2 huge moose, one in each hand. From that point on, life was easy for Little Listener and her brothers. The Chenoo made a lodge for himself from big trees and camped close to them. Each day, he helped them with their hunting. Not only were they able to feed themselves and the Chenoo on the game he brought, they also got many skins for trade and dried much meat to share with their relatives in the village. When the time came for them to return, Little Listener went to say goodbye to her grandfather. We must return to our people, she said to him. Granddaughter, said the Chenoo, I wish to come with you, but I do not wish to frighten the people. Although I may not appear fearsome to you and my grandsons, some people may be afraid of the way I look. Will you help me? Yes, grandfather. Tell me what we must do. Make for me a sweat lodge and make it very hot. So Little Listener and her 3 brothers made a big sweat lodge. When it was ready, the Chenoo went inside by himself, and they closed the door of the lodge. After he had been there a while, he called to Little Listener. "It is not hot enough." Little Listener opened the door, and her brothers piled on more hot stones. The red hot stones were higher than the height of a tall man, but still the Chenoo called for heat. 3 more times they opened the door and brought more stones. Then the Chenoo stayed inside a long, long time. At last, Little Listener called in to him. "Grandfather," she said, "are you all right?" The voice that answered was small and weak. "Open the door, granddaughter," it said. "I am ready." When Little Listener opened the door, out crawled not the giant Chenoo, but an old man, no larger than any other old man. His hair was long and white, and his face was kind. He leaned over and coughed. Out of his mouth came a piece of ice shaped like a man. "Granddaughter," he said, "that is my heart. Throw it into the fire, and I will be able to remain a human being as you see me now." Her 3 brothers were afraid to touch it, but Little Listener grabbed the icy heart of the Chenoo and threw it into the fire. It melted away. So it was that the kindness of Little Listener melted the heart of the giant Chenoo. So it was that she and her 3 brothers brought their grandfather back to the people. And when I last visited their village, all of them were still living there in happiness.